liftoff.
In less than a century, America has progressed from the sandy hills of Kitty Hawk along the Atlantic coast into the vast new ocean of space. The journey's been difficult and dangerous, but it's also been rewarding. It's given us a better understanding of our home planet, our solar system, and the universe. Although humans have dreamed of sailing outward from the planet Earth for centuries, the realization of that vision began just 5 decades ago.
I had been working for NACA since 1945 as a young aeronautical engineer right out of college in airplane flight test. And we were not interested in space at that time. We were interested in high-speed aerodynamics. The X-15 was being built.
There's the drop. Before it returns to Earth again, the X-15 may fly some 60 miles straight up at nearly 4,000 miles per hour.
We were in Cold War that was darn close to a hot war with the Russians. And there was great concern. Both sides had nuclear weapons.
You know, we grew up fearing the Russians. I can remember when I was in school going through drills where we got under our seats. So this idea of them beating us in space was a pretty awesome idea.
They were claiming superiority. And we didn't believe that, but they had been launching some rockets, and ours too often had been blowing up on the launch pad. And that was sort of the background to what happened then in 57 when they sent up Sputnik.
Here's a Russian satellite which is going over every 90 minutes, beeping. And it didn't take much imagination to know that that could have been a bomb.
I remember being very surprised that they had done this and that we had not been able to do it ahead of them. That was my main concern. I think that was the main concern of most Americans at that time.
Right then, I think we all inwardly resolved that that wasn't going to last. We were going to do something about it.
It was just a faint beep, a radio beacon, coming from a shiny little orb circling the Earth. In 1957, Sputnik signaled the beginning of the space age, and the United States was behind. Our first successful answer to Sputnik came with the launch of the Explorer 1 satellite, and within the year, the formation of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
When I came up here in May of 1958, there was no Marshall Space Flight Center. Von Braun and his team were all part of what was called the Army Ballistic Missile Agency. And it was that agency, actually, that built and launched the first Explorer satellites.
Control panel check. Roger. Measuring panel check. Measuring panel check. 10 seconds. 2, 1. Fire command. Fire command. Contact pressurized. Contact pressurized.
We took enormous pride in that because although it followed Sputnik, Explorer 1 had science instruments on it. And so it was really marks the first use of space for scientific exploration.
I found my thrill.
It gave us the idea that we were surrounded by radiation belts that we knew nothing about.
On Blueberry Hill, when I found you.
So we were off and running as a result of Sputnik. And it resulted, of course, in the establishment of NASA by President Eisenhower in the summer of 1958.
We have one of the most challenging assignments that has ever been given to modern man. We will be developing and launching into space vehicles needed to obtain scientific data and to explore the solar system. We will be preparing for the day when manned flight goes into space.
Keith Glennon was really outstanding in that period of drawing together the thoughts of the people in the organization and seeking people from outside. Of course, I was a young punk at that time in those early years, and I was a little hesitant about expressing myself, but the way he worked it, it got to a point where it was very common for everyone to really express how they felt.
On July the 1st, 1958, and Dr. Von Braun and about 2,000 of us, the members of the team, I guess, all transitioned from the Army to Marshall. We were blessed here because the leaders of all of our labs were original members of the Von Braun team. And these guys were brilliant scientists. They'd been there, they'd done it, they made mistakes, they'd blown up more rockets than anybody could ever conceive of, and they were our mentors.
I don't think but about once every 100 years a person like Von Braun comes around. He was a top-notch engineer. He was a top-notch scientist. But he had something that most other people don't have, and he was a visionary. You know, it was crazy about thinking about going to the moon. You know, it was crazy. And Von Braun knew we could do it. And after we'd been around him for a while, we knew we could.
That we have produced more scientific knowledge with our smaller vehicles than the Russians have with their much larger ones.
We were trying to build satellites, trying to get things going, trying to catch up with the Russians and pass them by, and a lot of exciting things were going on in those early days.
An Air Force Thor Able-1 space probe under the management of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration achieved a near-perfect takeoff.
Guys like Max Faget and the Pilotless Aircraft Research Division, who had been designing these rockets over at Wallops, they had all been dreaming about manned in space. And I remember walking into Max Faget's office, and there on the wall he had a picture of a guy in a fetal position in a little capsule. I said, "What are you going to do with that, Max?" He said, "Well, we're going to launch a guy into space." And I said, "Well, you know that the G's are very, very high." He says, "Oh yeah, he'll black out, but he'll come to."
Would you like to swing on a star, carry moonbeams home in a jar?
We knew the Soviets were going to try and fly a man after they launched their first satellite, and the Soviets knew we were going to try to do the same thing.
The nation was getting ready to put a man in space. I mean, that was a commitment and that was the focus. We didn't know much about the space environment. You know, a young person like myself with no experience was on an equal par with everybody because no one had any experience, and it was exciting times, and any information you found was valuable, and people were interested in it and looked at it.
Then when they opened this up for manned spaceflight and announced that program and won volunteers for it, I thought that was a natural with the background I had of test flying, and I met the criteria that they were shooting for.
Well, my hands are shaky and my knees are weak. I can't seem to stand on my own 2 feet. Who do you think of when you have such luck? I'm in love. I'm all shook up.
I was a test pilot. And the job of a test pilot is to fly new airplanes. Here